The mud on my boots weighed exactly 3 pounds, heavy with the specific clay loam density of the Pacific Northwest, and it was ruining Renata's porch. I scraped the soles against the iron grate, listening to October rain hammer the cedar shingles above me. Through the front window, I could see her pacing the living room, her dark hair twisted into a messy bun, one hand gripping a city-stamped paper so tightly the edge had bent. I did not need to read the document to know what it was. The bright yellow tag stapled to her front gate 30 minutes earlier had already told the whole story. Code violation. Imminent hazard. I turned the brass knob and stepped inside, leaving my boots on the mat. The entry hall smelled of old pine, chamomile tea, damp wool, and the kind of house that had been loved for too long by people who could no longer afford to keep saving it. Renata did not stop pacing. She turned toward me and held up the paper like it might burn through her fingers. "Peterson," she said. Her voice was flat, the kind of calm people use when panic would cost too much energy. "I saw his truck pull away," I replied, keeping my tone even. I unzipped my canvas work jacket and folded it over the radiator. The jacket had cost $20 at a thrift store, and it looked like it. That was why I liked it. Nobody looked at it and saw the Mitchell name. Nobody saw boardrooms, trust funds, or a father who thought every problem could be crushed under money. "What's the damage?" I asked. Renata looked down at the notice. "The south retaining wall," she read, "and the root system of the heritage oak. He says the slope is failing. If the wall gives, the mud could take out the sidewalk and part of the street below." She swallowed once. "He's giving me 14 days to submit an engineered fix, or he starts the safety condemnation process. Oliver, he can make me leave my own house." She set the notice on the coffee table. It landed beside a stack of past-due utility bills. There was the first wall she was fighting. Not stone, not timber, money. A proper engineered retaining wall with root stabilization could cost $40,000 before the first shovel hit dirt. Renata had less than a fraction of that. I knew because the walls in the old house were thin, and the week before, I had heard her on the phone with her sister, trying to make $2,000 sound like a plan. 14 days, I repeated. I walked to the window. Outside, the massive oak tree leaned over the slope like it was trying to hold the hillside together by stubbornness alone. Water tracked through the soil around its base. The retaining stones below it had begun to belly outward. "That is a tight window for earth moving," I said. "I don't have the money to hire a crew," Renata said. I called 3 companies after Peterson left. One laughed. One said they could come look next month. The third wanted a deposit bigger than my mortgage. She crossed her arms over her oversized sweater. Usually, Renata Williams moved through the house like she owned every inch, because she did. That night, the house looked too big around her. "And if the city condemns it," she continued, "you can't live here either. Your room gets padlocked with the rest of the property." She thought I was broke. She thought I was a day laborer who brought cash home in envelopes and ate ramen because I had to, not because simple things felt cleaner than the world I came from. 6 months ago, I had rented her spare room because I wanted quiet. I wanted work that ended with dirt under my nails instead of signatures under my family name. I wanted one place where nobody asked what Oliver Mitchell could buy. "I'll figure something out for myself," I said. Renata stepped closer. Her jaw set, but her eyes moved toward the rain-dark window before they returned to me. "No, I made a deal when you moved in. I'm your landlord. I'm not putting you on the street because my wall is failing." "Renata, I can't afford an engineering firm," she said. "You told me last week your truck needs a new transmission and you're short on rent." That part was my fault. I had lied about the rent. I wanted to see if I could negotiate an extension like a normal man instead of reaching for the platinum card hidden in my glove box. Renata lifted the city notice again, then pressed it flat against the table as if she could hold the whole property down by hand. "This is a repair agreement," she said carefully. "Nothing personal. You can say no, and I'll still give you until Friday on rent. But here is my offer. You work construction. You know dirt. If you help me dig the trenches and build enough stabilization to pass Peterson's inspection, I will waive your rent for 6 months. We pool our resources. We save the house." I looked at her. She was offering protection she could barely afford to give, trying to keep a roof over the head of a man who could buy the entire street with one phone call. The guilt did not come as a thought. It came as pressure behind my ribs, tight enough that I had to look away. I could not write a check. Not like that. Not without breaking the one thing Renata still had left, her right to fight for her own home. She needed help. She did not need to be purchased. "Deal," I said. "But we do it my way. No temporary cosmetic brace. We fix the grade properly, or we do not touch the wall at all. The wind rose hard enough to rattle the antique glass in the windows. The overhead lights flickered, buzzed, then died. The whole house dropped into darkness. Perfect, Renata muttered. I reached for my phone flashlight, but she was already moving. She crossed the room by memory, opened the hall closet, and pulled out a thick cream blanket and 2 pillows. I thought you said the spare room was colder than the porch, I said. It is. And the guest chair has a broken leg. It has character. It has 3 legs. Renata gave me a look through the dark. I can sleep anywhere, Oliver. Couch, floor, porch swing, back seat of my car if necessary. She said it like a woman who had spent years proving she did not need comfort. Then she dropped the blanket onto the couch beside me. Not the armchair, not the guest chair, the couch beside me. I looked at the open space between the cushions, then back at her. There are other places to sit, I said. I know. She tucked one pillow under her arm and nodded toward the yellow city notice on the coffee table. But tonight, if we're making a plan to keep the house from sliding into the street, I would rather not sit across the room pretending I'm fine. That stopped me, not because it was romantic, because it was honest. I sat at the far end of the couch, leaving a full cushion between us. Renata sat on the other side, knees tucked under the blanket, the pillow held against her ribs like a shield. The old house creaked around us. Rain punched the windows. Outside, water rushed through gutters already working too hard. The thumbnail version of this moment would have looked simple. 2 people on a couch, a blanket, warm lamplight, the night pressing against the glass. The truth was less simple. The yellow hazard notice sat between us on the coffee table like a third person. Beside it were overdue bills, a cracked mug of chamomile tea, and a piece of grid paper that might decide whether Renata still had a home in 2 weeks. I've got flashlights in my gear bag, I said. Good, she replied, because I have a desperate idea, and I need you to tell me if it's stupid. I'll tell you if it's unsafe, I said. Stupid is negotiable. For the first time all night, her mouth almost smiled. Then, don't move, she said. I'm getting the grid paper. I found 2 heavy-duty LED torches in my room and returned to the living room. Renata had already pulled a sheet of grid paper from beneath the bills and was smoothing it on the coffee table. I clicked on one light and aimed it at the ceiling. The beam softened across the room, catching the old bookshelves, cracked plaster, and framed sketches Renata had drawn of the house when she first inherited it. The temperature was already dropping. The storm is stalling over the coast, I said, checking my phone. It will rain for 3 days straight. The slope is going to get heavier. Can we even dig in this? We have to relieve water pressure before the soil decides for us. Renata pushed the grid paper toward me. I tried to sketch what Peterson said. The drawing was rough but clear. The oak, the slope, the old wall, the street below. Renata was a freelance illustrator, and even under stress, her lines knew where to go. I set my flashlight beside the paper and pulled a mechanical pencil from my pocket. The issue is not only the stones, I said. It's hydraulic pressure. Water has nowhere to drain, so it builds up behind the wall and turns the soil into weight. The roots are losing their anchor. I drew a cross-section beside her sketch. Slope, French drain, gravel backfill, deadman anchors, grade line. Renata watched the pencil move. You draw like an architect, she said. I pay attention on job sites. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she let the answer pass. We need a laser transit tomorrow morning, I said. A trench, drainage rock, pipe, and an excavator. Her mouth tightened. Oliver, an excavator costs $1,000 a day. I know a guy. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have before midnight. She looked at the paper again. Her thumb pressed against the corner until the grid creased. I can sell my drafting table, she said quietly, and my car, if I have to. You need your car. I need my house more. The gas stove still worked, so I went to the kitchen, struck a match, and boiled water for tea. The hiss of flame filled the dark house. It was a small sound, but it made the place feel inhabited instead of defeated. When I brought the mugs back, Renata had redrawn the slope from a cleaner angle. She had added arrows where water moved and labels where the old wall had bulged. It was better than half the field sketches I had seen from trained crews. This helps, I said. She glanced up. Really? Really. A small line between her brows eased. We spent the next hour turning panic into a plan. I wrote the material list. She organized the bills, the code notice, and her drawing into neat piles. Whenever the wind hit the siding hard enough to make the windows tremble, Renata stopped, listened, then forced her eyes back to the paper. That was bravery, not fearlessness. Returning to the work while fear was still in the room. Close to midnight, the couch became our temporary command center. Renata stayed curled under the blanket with a pencil behind one ear, adding labels to the diagram. I sat beside her, not touching, not crowding, one cushion of space between us and a whole collapsing hillside outside the window. Do you always make people solve drainage problems before you let them sleep? I asked. No, she said. Usually I make them fix the radiator first. That radiator is a crime. That radiator is family. It screams every time the heat turns on. It has emotional range. I looked toward the hallway as the radiator clicked, groaned, and released a long metallic shriek. Renata pointed at it without looking up. See? It agrees with me. Despite the rain, despite the notice, despite the stack of bills, I laughed. So did she. The sound was small. But in that house, on that couch, in the middle of a night trying to break her, it mattered. When exhaustion finally pulled at her shoulders, Renata leaned back against the cushion and closed her eyes for 1 second too long. You should sleep, I said. I told you. I can sleep anywhere. You also told me you needed the house more than the car. Her eyes opened. That was before the house tried to become a mudslide. Renata. She held up one finger. 20 minutes. You said that 40 minutes ago. Then I'm consistent. I picked up the yellow notice and set it on top of the diagram so the corners would stop curling. Sleep, I said. I'll stay up and finish the material count. She looked from the notice to me. You don't have to sit here. I know. You can take the armchair. I know. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she pulled the blanket higher, kept the pillow tucked against her side, and settled into the far end of the couch. Not close enough to make it something it wasn't. Close enough to say she did not want to be alone with the fear. I stayed where I was. Outside, the storm battered the glass. Inside, I counted gravel, pipe, labor hours, machine time, and the number of lies I had already told to remain ordinary. By 5 in the morning, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle. Renata had finally fallen asleep, still on the couch, one hand resting near the city notice. I left a note beside her mug. Gone for equipment. Do not sell the car before coffee. Then I drove my battered Ford to the equipment yard on the edge of town. Jack Rodriguez was already at the gate, holding a thermos and looking like he had been expecting me to make a bad decision before sunrise. Jack was my foreman, my oldest professional ally, and one of the few people alive who knew exactly who my father was and why I refused to use the family name. You look like hell, Mitchell, he said. I need the Kubota U55, I replied. Laser level, shoring panels, drainage kit. Delivered to the 4th Street property in an hour. Jack whistled low. That's a lot of iron for a landlord favor. Peterson tagged her wall. 14 days. Jack's face changed. Peterson, he said. That man is a shark. Tags old properties, buries owners in fines, and somehow his brother-in-law always hears about the auction first. My jaw tightened. Not this one. Jack watched me unlock the yard gate. Who is paying for the machine on the books? My personal account. He raised an eyebrow. Anonymously. I added. If Renata asks, you tell her I traded labor for machine time. Jack shook his head. You know secrets are like bad drainage, pressure builds. I know. You need a swamper. I have one. Does she know what a swamper is? She is bringing coffee. Jack laughed once and started the paperwork. When the flatbed rolled up to Renata's house at 7, she was standing on the porch with 2 thermoses of cheap drip coffee and a face that said she had not forgiven my note. The massive orange excavator came down the ramps with a diesel growl. Renata stared at it, then at me. Oliver, she called over the engine. Are you sure you know how to drive that? I climbed into the cab instead of answering. The machine settled around me like a familiar coat. I engaged the hydraulics, tracked carefully up the steep driveway, rotated the cab with inches to spare from her porch railing, and set the bucket precisely 3 feet from the base of the oak. Not a scrape, not a bump. When I stepped down, Renata was still holding both thermoses. I'll take that coffee now, I said. She handed it over without looking away from the excavator. You are very annoying. That is usually what people say when impressed. I am saving my compliments until the wall is still standing. Fair. We worked until the sun dropped behind the pines. Renata was relentless. She dragged perforated pipe through the mud, held the grade rod steady, photographed every step, and used her illustrator's hand to redraw the drainage plan clean enough that even Peterson could not pretend to misunderstand it. Clay smeared her sleeves. Rain darkened her sweater. She did not complain once. Whenever I told her something was unsafe, she stopped. Whenever I explained why, she listened. That mattered more than muscle. By the fourth day, the backyard had turned into a battlefield of orange flags, drainage pipe, plywood sheets, and mud. The old oak groaned in the wind. Every time the gusts hit, Renata looked up at the branches before she looked at the wall. I noticed. "You're thinking about the tree," I said. "My grandfather planted it the year my mother was born," she replied. "If Peterson condemns this place, the tree goes with it. Developers don't keep old roots. They call them obstacles." She knelt beside a pile of survey flags and began numbering them with a permanent marker. Her handwriting was clean despite the cold. I crouched across from her and adjusted the site sketch between us. "Then we make the tree part of the solution," I said. "Not the problem. The root zone stays protected. We stabilize around it." She looked at the sketch, then at the oak. "You can really do that?" "If we respect the load path, yes." "That sounds expensive." "It sounds precise." "Oliver, it is both." She gave me a look, and for a second, even with the rain and mud and danger, there was almost humor in it. "Fine," I said. "Expensive and precise." She capped the marker with her teeth, realized what she had done, and made a face at the mud on the cap. I handed her a clean rag from my back pocket. "You carry everything?" she asked. "Not everything, just enough to make me suspicious." "That seems healthy." She almost smiled. Then the wind pushed hard through the pines, and the smile disappeared. A thin line of mud shifted near the lower stones. Renata saw it at the same time I did. Neither of us spoke. I set the rag down, stood, and grabbed the shovel. That afternoon I found the first hidden failure. The old wall had not been built as one wall. It was a patchwork of fixes, decades of desperate repairs layered over one another by people who loved the house but did not have the money to repair it properly. Behind the second row of stones, we found rotten timber. Behind that, broken clay pipe. Behind that, soil so wet it shone black under the shovel. Renata stood beside the trench, holding the flashlight steady. "This was already failing before I inherited it," she said. "Yes." Her mouth pressed into a hard line. "My aunt told me I was lucky to get the house. She said property is security." "It can be." She forgot to mention security comes with invoices. I looked up at her. Rain dripped from the brim of my cap onto the shovel handle. "You still want to save it?" She looked back at the house. The porch light flickered in the rain. Old cedar siding, sagging gutters, cracked paint, warm windows. Then she looked at the oak. "Yes," she said, "but I want to save it right. I'm tired of patching things badly because I'm scared." That was the first time she said the real thing out loud. Not just that the house was in danger. That fear had been running the project before either of us touched a shovel. I nodded once and climbed back into the trench. Then we stopped patching. On the third inspection day, Peterson came back early. I was in the trench checking the slope of the gravel bed when the city vehicle rolled to the curb. Peterson stepped out in a pristine rain jacket, clipboard tucked under one arm, his expression already arranged into false sympathy. Renata wiped mud from her sleeve and walked down to meet him. I climbed out of the trench and stayed close enough to hear. "Miss Williams," Peterson said, "I see you are attempting a repair. Unfortunately, without a licensed structural engineer's stamp, I cannot allow continued excavation. You may be compromising the street." "We are installing drainage and temporary stabilization," Renata said, holding out her updated diagram. "The work is within the failure zone. It is documented." Peterson barely glanced at the paper. "It requires a permit. I submitted the emergency stabilization notice last night. That is not an approved permit." He pulled a red tag from his folder. "I am issuing a stop work order and escalating the fine. $5,000 by Friday, or the condemnation process begins." Renata's hand tightened around her diagram. The paper crumpled at one corner. $5,000 would break her. She had told me the night before that she could cover gravel only if she sold her car. A fine would not punish negligence, it would punish poverty. I stepped forward. I did not yell. I did not threaten. I pulled my waterproof phone from my pocket and opened the municipal code page I had checked twice after midnight. "Section 4, paragraph 12, I said. "Emergency stabilization of a failing slope threatening a public right-of-way can proceed before standard permit approval if the work is supervised by a licensed professional and documented for inspection. Peterson's eyes moved to me. And who are you? The resident, I said, and a licensed landscape architect. I held up my digital license. The grade is shot at a 2% drop. Hydrostatic pressure is being redirected away from the curb. Washed 3/4-inch gravel is being compacted every 6 inches. Every step is photographed. Miss Williams has also drawn a revised site diagram showing drainage direction and slope risk. Renata looked at me quickly. She had not known I had used her diagram that way. Peterson stared at my license, then at my muddy clothes, trying to make the two things not match. They matched. That was his problem. You still need a formal inspection, he snapped. Day 14, I said, as listed on your original notice. He looked at the trench. I stepped slightly to the side, not in front of Renata like she needed hiding, but close enough that Peterson would have to address both of us. And if you enter the active work zone, I added, you will need a hard hat. Peterson flushed, shoved the red tag back into his folder, and walked back to his vehicle. The silence after his truck left was thick. Only the excavator idled behind us. Renata looked at the phone in my hand. You're licensed. Landscape architect, I said. Yes. And you were renting a tiny room from me while pretending your truck could barely shift. The truck does need finesse. That is not an answer. No, I admitted. It is not. She did not push. Not then. That was one of the things I respected about Renata. She knew when a secret was load-bearing, and when ripping it out too early might bring down the roof. She walked to the edge of the trench and looked at the leveled gravel. You just saved my house. We are not done yet, I said, picking up my shovel. We still have to build the wall. That night, the physical toll caught both of us. My shoulders ached with a deep, grinding fatigue. Renata's hands were red from cold and marked by small blisters. I sat at the kitchen table, mapping out the next day's material list, when she set a plate of hot pasta in front of me. Eat, she said. You too. I will after I open these. She pulled a stack of envelopes toward her. The top one bore the city seal. Beneath it was a notice about overdue property taxes. Renata. Don't, she said, not looking up. I pay my own way. I can sell some original illustrations. I can sell the drafting table if I have to. I will cover the gravel. Her fingers slipped under the envelope flap and stopped there. I wanted to take the paper from her. I wanted to log into an account, transfer enough money to erase the stack, and let her sleep for one night without numbers hunting her. Instead, I kept my hands on my side of the table. Money would fix the bill. It would not fix the fear of being bought. You do not owe me anything beyond the repair agreement, I said. And if we need to change that agreement, we write it down after the wall is safe, not while you are cornered. She finally looked up. Is that all this is? I held her gaze. It has to be until the house is safe. The answer cost more than I expected. But she nodded. The next morning, the sky broke open into cold, clean light. We had 3 days left before Peterson's deadline. The delivery truck arrived with interlocking concrete blocks, each one heavy enough to crush a careless man's leg. This was the dangerous part. I operated the excavator from the cab. Renata stood safely outside the swing radius with a pry bar and a 4-foot level, guiding each block only after I set it down. Back, I called. She stepped back. I lowered the first block millimeter by millimeter until it settled against the gravel base. She checked the bubble. Good, she called. We repeated the process for 10 hours. Not romantic, not pretty. Better than that. Necessary. By sunset, the final block locked into place, holding the soil and the oak's root zone behind engineered stone. Water ran through the drain outlet instead of pressing against the wall. The street below stayed clean. I shut down the excavator. The sudden quiet rang in my ears. Renata stood near the oak with one hand resting against the bark. She looked from the wall to the street, then to me. Her clothes were muddy. Her hair had come loose from the bun. Her face was exhausted. And she looked like someone who had refused to disappear. We did it, she said. I walked over and took the heavy pry bar from her tired hands, leaning it against the tree. You did it, I said. You did not stop. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. Oliver, she said. Jack told me. My stomach went cold. Jack talks too much. He told me who paid the machine deposit. He told me you covered part of the stone delivery. Her voice stayed steady. He said it came from a trust account. I did not lie. Not again. I did not want to humiliate you, I said. I knew you would say no. Renata took one step closer. You lied about the rent. Yes. You lied about the truck. Yes. And you let me offer you 6 months of free rent while you could have paid for the whole wall? The truth stood between us, uglier than mud. I wanted to stay, I said. Not as Oliver Mitchell, not as a checkbook, not as someone people made room for because of a last name. I wanted to be useful here. I wanted to be the man who fixed things with his hands. Her eyes did not soften right away. Good. I had not earned easy softness. She reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out the folded repair agreement we had written the first night. You do not get to pay my property taxes, she said. Understood. You do not get to hide invoices from me. Understood. You do not get to decide what my pride can survive. That one landed hardest. I nodded once. Understood. She held up the agreement. After inspection, we rewrite this. Real numbers. Real terms. I pay what I can. You pay rent like a normal tenant until we decide otherwise. Done. And tonight, she added, voice still firm, you can buy dinner. I looked at her. That sounds like a loophole. It is. A small one. A tired smile touched her face. And you can fix the radiator in the hallway, she said. Because that thing screams like a haunted train. That was not forgiveness wrapped in a speech. It was better. It was a next step. On day 14, Peterson returned with the head of the city engineering department. Renata stood on the porch beside me with her clean site diagrams clipped to a board. I kept my hands in my pockets and let her do the talking. The engineer walked the length of the new wall. He checked the drainage outlet. He shot the grade with his own laser. He compared Renata's diagrams with the actual slope and nodded once. Peterson said very little. After 20 minutes, the engineer came back to the porch. It is a textbook emergency stabilization, Miss Williams, he said, signing the approval sheet. The slope is stabilized. The heritage oak is protected for now. The condemnation order is lifted pending routine follow-up. He handed her the green tag. Renata took it with both hands. She did not cheer. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket like something too important to wave around. Peterson walked back to the city truck without meeting her eyes. Jack arrived an hour later to load the excavator onto the flatbed. He handed me the final rental receipt. Sign here, boss, he said, grinning like a man who knew he was still in trouble. I took the pen. Renata stepped beside me. Before he signs that, she said, her voice clear enough to carry across the yard, we need to update our agreement. Jack's grin grew. I paused. You are not waiving my rent for 6 months, I said. I can pay it. I know you can, Renata replied. That is why we are writing a proper maintenance plan instead. You will pay rent. I will pay what I can toward materials. And if you are going to keep fixing radiators, gutters, drainage, and whatever else this old house throws at us, I want it in writing that you are staying. The yard went quiet, not because the words were dramatic, because they were practical. That was Renata's way of choosing someone. Not a kiss in the rain, not a speech, a document, a plan, a place at the table. She was choosing me as a partner with a shovel, not a savior with a checkbook. I handed the clipboard back to Jack. Draft the terms, I told her. I'll sign them tonight. Then I turned to Renata. I did not pull her into my arms. I did not turn the moment into a performance. I just bumped my muddy shoulder gently against hers. She leaned back, steady and warm in the cold afternoon air. Behind us, the house stood safe. The wall held. Water moved where it was supposed to go. The oak stayed rooted. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I was hiding from the Mitchell name. I felt like I had finally built something strong enough to stand under my own. The end. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. Real help does not erase someone's agency. Green flag. The right person stands beside you in the mud, not above you with a checkbook. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.